It was a bustling afternoon at the airport. Passengers rushed through terminals, flight announcements echoed across the intercom, and a sea of travelers moved in every direction. Among the crowd stood an older man, well-dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and his eyes calm yet sharp. He carried himself with quiet dignity, his posture upright, exuding an air of wisdom and authority. Then came the disruption. A young man, barely in his early 20s, shoved his way through the crowd with an air of arrogance. Dressed in a gray hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, he carried himself like the world owed him something. His impatient sighs and muttered complaints made it clear, he had no respect for anyone around him. And when he locked eyes with the older man, something inside him decided this was the perfect target for his frustration. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story and want more captivating narratives like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now, back to the airport. The young man, whose name was Ryan, was running late for his flight. He had spent too much time scrolling on his phone at a cafe and now, in his rush, he felt that everyone in his path was an inconvenience. As he pushed forward, he collided shoulder to shoulder with the older man. The impact made Ryan stumble slightly, but instead of apologizing, he turned with annoyance. "Watch where you're going, old man," Ryan snapped, his voice laced with irritation. The older man didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his suit and looked at Ryan with eyes that had seen more than he could ever imagine. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep and measured. Ryan scoffed. "Yeah, you heard me. Some of us have places to be. Maybe move a little faster next time." A few heads turned in the busy terminal. People were starting to notice the tension, but no one intervened. Some shook their heads, others watched with curiosity. The older man gave a small nod. "I see. And you believe your time is more valuable than anyone else's?" Ryan rolled his eyes. "Oh, great. A lecture. Look, just get out of my way." And then Ryan did something he would regret. He reached out and grabbed the older man by the collar of his suit, pulling him slightly forward. It was meant to be an intimidation tactic, something to assert dominance. But the moment his fingers clenched the fabric, he felt a shift in the air. The older man's expression didn't change. No fear, no anger, just pure control. Ryan, on the other hand, felt something unsettling creep into his chest. It was as if, in an instant, he had made the worst mistake of his life. A man in a nearby security uniform started moving toward them, but before he could step in, the older man finally spoke again. For a split second, Ryan hesitated. The weight of the older man's gaze sent an unsettling chill down his spine. He had confronted plenty of people before, baristas who got his order wrong, classmates who dared to challenge him, even his own father when things got heated at home. But this was different. His grip on the man's collar tightened slightly, as if doubling down on his decision would somehow erase the creeping sense of dread washing over him. "What?" he snapped, his voice less steady than before. "You got something to say, old man?" The older man didn't move, didn't flinch. It was as if Ryan wasn't even a threat, as if he had seen this kind of bravado 100 times before. His silence was unnerving. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. Why wasn't this man reacting? Most people would have shoved him back or at least looked angry. But this guy? His expression was unreadable, controlled, calculating. Ryan suddenly felt like a child throwing a tantrum in front of someone who had already lived a dozen lifetimes. The murmurs around them grew louder. People were watching, whispering, some recording with their phones. The realization hit Ryan hard, he wasn't the intimidating one here. He was the spectacle. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some control. "Yeah, that's what I thought," he muttered, releasing his grip. But the moment his hand left the man's collar, a strange sense of relief washed over him, like he had just let go of a live wire before it could electrocute him. And then, for the first time, the older man shifted. "Young man," he said, his voice unwavering. "Do you know who I am?" Ryan scoffed, trying to mask his unease. "Should I care?" A smirk played on the older man's lips. "Perhaps." Then, without any effort, the older man moved his wrist slightly, and Ryan's grip on his collar instantly loosened. It was a small movement, but the force behind it was controlled, precise, like someone who had spent a lifetime mastering discipline. Ryan stepped back, confused. But now, embarrassment turned into frustration. Ryan clenched his fists, breathing heavily. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" he hissed. "Just because you wear a suit and talk all formal doesn't mean you can act superior." The older man sighed, shaking his head slightly. "It's not about acting superior. It's about understanding your place in the world. You mistake arrogance for strength, but real power, real control, comes from discipline." Ryan let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, please. You're just some retired old guy who probably spends his days reminiscing about the good old times." The older man took a step closer. The weight of his presence alone made Ryan instinctively step back. "I spent over 30 years in the military. I've trained some of the most elite fighters in the world. I've stood on battlefields you couldn't even fathom, protected people who never knew my name, and faced threats far greater than you." He took another step forward, his voice lowering slightly. "And you? You think grabbing me by the collar makes you strong?" Ryan felt his stomach drop. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. This wasn't just some random old man. This was someone who had seen real danger, someone who had faced real power. Ryan's bravado cracked. He looked around, realizing the growing audience. He swallowed hard, trying to think of a way to backtrack. "Look, I was just in a hurry," he mumbled. "Didn't mean anything by it." The older man gave him a long, assessing look before nodding. "Then let this be a lesson. Strength is not in how loud you are, nor in how hard you push others aside. Strength is knowing when to stand firm and when to step back. And most of all, knowing that respect will take you further in life than arrogance ever will." A security officer finally reached them. "Is everything all right here?" The older man didn't take his eyes off Ryan. He simply smiled. "No trouble at all." Ryan, on the other hand, had turned pale. He took a step back, then another. His arrogance had vanished. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, walking faster than before. The older man adjusted his sleeve and continued toward his gate as if nothing had happened. But for Ryan, that moment would stay with him forever. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the lesson he needed. If you enjoyed this story and want more thought-provoking narratives like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and let us know in the comments what you would have done in this situation. Until next time.